The more egoless you are, the better you build trust. And what I mean by that is, if you are the kind of person who puts user, company before yourself, right? You take a company point of view. If you're the kind of person who says, hey, I actually don't need that many people for this project, I can do it with less. I think we are working on the wrong initiative. We need to change it because this is not additive. Or I'm willing to do this for the other team. You're wearing that hat, what's right for the company, what's right for the user, as opposed to being about yourself or your team or your project. That's what builds trust, because people look to you as someone who can partner well with others, someone who always tries to strive to do the right thing. If you really think about what will help you stand out, who's the person who actually takes a broader view and tries to do the right thing, even though it might not be in the short term very beneficial to you, that's the best way to gain trust. I mean, how many people would say, hey, the product we are working on, we should stop doing it, because, it's very rare to see. Yeah, and the more folks do that, they build that trust and credibility that they're always trying to do the right thing.
Cool. Welcome, everyone. So my guest today is Amit Fulay, VP of Communication Products at Microsoft. Before Microsoft, Amit spent 15 years building products at Meta and Google. He also teaches a popular course on how to level up from a middle manager or senior IC to become an influential product leader at your company. So really excited to discuss this topic with him. Welcome, Amit.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me. And congrats on your success with your newsletter. I've been following you. Really good to see.
Yeah, it's great to learn from product leaders like yourself. So first topic, let's talk about, how folks can influence product leaders, right? And maybe the first step is to recognize what kind of leader you yourself are. And I think you have a really good framework for this. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen product leaders who spike on like 3 different types of skills. There are thinkers, there are builders, and there are harmonizers. I made up that word. But the essential idea is, if you worked with an influential product leader, you've probably seen them be really strong at one of these aspects. Thinkers are your typical visionaries, big ideas people. They're the kind of folks who get excited about the product craft, where to take, your product. Your builders are more operators, really good at getting things done. Might not be the biggest visionaries, but really understand, how to execute, have the context of the company, the trade-offs, attracting the right talent to get stuff done. And harmonizers are, folks who are really place a huge premium on collaboration. They have all the good relationships. They optimize for people. They are the kind of people who can do the tough negotiations, really find win. And I've seen, product leaders typically fall into one of these buckets. Not to say that leaders don't have all of these skills. They do. They have a combination of these. But what I've found is there's a default and there's a strength, there's a superpower, which typically falls in one of these buckets.
Yeah. And so how do you, if I want to influence each type of product leader, how would I go about thinking about this?
Yeah. And I think that's a good question, because you probably need to deploy different tactics, right? I'll give you a very simple example, and I'm sure PMs listening to this podcast can relate to. You go into a product review and you'll know what kind of a product leader it is based on which line of questioning they pursue, right? Let's say you have a new product proposal. There'll be some leaders who really get into the experience and the pixels and the details. I have worked personally with product leaders who rely a lot on data and how we came about the conclusion, the analysis. They want to really dig into it. I've also seen product leaders whose first question will be, hey, that's a great proposal, but have you aligned with Team X? Have you talked to this person, right? Because these are the harmonizer kinds. And so all of you, if you're doing product reviews, you'll know what kind of things the leader has. Now, that could change based on the project or time, but typically there's a strength. And so first is you should understand who you're presenting to, know your audience, so to speak. That's number one thing you do in influencing. But once you have a good sense, you really have to figure out what's the best way to appeal. Let's say if you're pitching a new idea, how do you maximize your odds of getting approval for that idea. That's your influencing goal. And so once you know the leader, I think you can rely on logic, you can rely on storytelling and narrative. You can make sure you've done all of the I have aligned, I have talked, that kind of conversation. So you can prepare once you know what kind of product leader it is. And what I've seen typically when you stumble is when you have a visionary product leader and you're going in with a lot of data and reason, or when you have a product leader who's very data oriented and you're doing a lot of storytelling, and if they are receiving this, they might think this is full of fluff. Show me kind of the proof points, right? And so I think that mismatch is what people stumble over. So understand kind of where the context is, who the leader is, how they see the world, what their strengths are, and I think you're much able to frame it in a way that increases the odds.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess you get this understanding from experience presented to them, but also maybe from your boss or your chain of command, right? Hopefully you can get some intel from that.
Exactly.
So I felt hard in my career, if I'm one particular type to influence another type, right? So for example, I think I'm probably in the builder type. I like to execute and just iterate and craft really good products. And then, if I have to present to a leader who only thinks big picture, it's harder for me to actually make it work. Yeah. So do you have any advice for this for people who have this default mode that doesn't really match with the other leader?
Look, I think there are obviously big thinkers, and I think you have to project your idea out in order to show what the potential is. I mean, we see if you're pitching a new idea in a startup, this is the kind of thing VCs demand out of you all the time. You might have a great product build, but typically it'll be how big can this be? What's the TAM? How much can you capture? Because they are looking for returns. And so, it's not an atypical ask. A lot of leaders will be, this is good, but how big can it be? And is it strategic enough for us to invest in it? And so if you are in that position where you're hey, I've built something, I would say spend time in, just doing a little bit of 10x thinking and what is the success case? When you magnify the idea, when you scale it out, how big could it be? I'll give an example. My early days at Google, I was working on Google Wallet. It's super early, before it was a NFC-based wallet. And I distinctly remember in one of the reviews, Larry was there. And, Larry was very famous for his 10x thinking. He genuinely thought big, that's how he operated. He pushed us. We were talking about interchange rates and how, credit card companies charge an interchange rate, and how do you absorb the cost, or do you pass it to consumers? And in that review, we had all this data prepared on interchange rates and how much can we absorb and modeling. And Larry was like, wait, why don't we buy a MasterCard, right? And it was a question that, stumped everybody in that room because it was a provocative question. But that's the kind of thinking he had, which is if we were to buy MasterCard, can we get rid of these rates? And so, you'll see a lot of leaders push and help you expand your thinking. And I think if more you do it yourself, I think better off you're going to be.
Yeah, so maybe removing yourself from the PM of a Google Wallet and think if you were the CEO, what would you do with this project?
Exactly.
Maybe that would help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Unconstrain yourself and magnify in the best case. Now you don't have to make stuff up, but you have to, be able to articulate what's possible, what's possible in your imagination. I think that is a skill. Now, not every leader is that way, right? I have found some supremely pragmatic leaders, not that they're not capable of, but they'll really talk about, hey, I just don't see why this would ever become big. And in which case, what you've built is the one that you really need to prove out. But yeah, I think you need both set of things.
So speaking of, product leaders, product management, there's been a lot of talk about some people posting product management is dead or something, right? And there's been a lot of flattening of layers recently. People using AI potentially to replace product managers. So I guess given all these different trends, do you think there's one type of leader that's, maybe best positioned to excel right now, or is you still think you need all three to make this work? Yeah.
So first I know like death of X kind of makes for a really interesting, provocative meme. I don't know if I subscribe to that. I don't know if, particular discipline is done or anything. I do know all of us will have to evolve. And this is not just product managers, right? This applies to engineers because you see GitHub Copilot and all the other things where you can automate a lot of, coding stuff. It applies to designers and marketers and all of us. But I think of it more as something that evolves. And you really try to imagine if all of us have these tools and the tools, AI tools, and they get more and more sophisticated, what would it look like 3 years from now and 5 years from now? And my sense is, are just these names and descriptions of these roles are going to change. I mean, imagine, Peter, if you're doing a startup 5 years from now and you start from scratch, you're probably not going to hire engineers, designers the way we know today. You'll have a group of people who are, really passionate about a problem and trying to figure it out. And you have all these tools. You could design it and you could prototype it and build it. And it doesn't matter who was a PM or engineer. You'd all like product maestros, so to speak, right? It's like, and so the way with that, when you think about that, what's going to be valuable a few years from now is almost interdisciplinary skills, right? And your ability to just have a little bit multifaceted understanding of data and engineering and design principles and to marshal those tools to build something. I feel like that's where we're going, and that's what we got to equip ourselves with. So to your question, what kind of leaders? I mean, I think the leaders who succeed are the ones who have deep kind of empathy and have the ability to pick the right problems. And the way you get it done is we're all kind of generalists in some ways with a lot of tools at our disposal, and we can build whatever we dream of.
Yeah, I mean, like the best people I've worked with are people who like aren't really defined by their job title, right? Like they will like do some PMs who will do some design, or engineers who have product opinions.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you think of CEOs of a startup, and in some ways it's the closest proxy we have today. Because as a CEO early on, you are doing, you're conceiving the idea, you're recruiting, you're a recruiter at some point, you're pitching, you're marketing it, you're building it. I mean, you kind of require all sorts of these skills. Imagine all of us, operating in that mode because AI just enables that. And that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay, awesome. So how does that mesh with, like the traditional PM career ladder, right? Like, everybody wants to become a VP like yourself. What do you think will actually be required to break into senior product leadership in this new world? Or maybe it's the same skills that's always being required.
I think what's going to be unique to us in some ways as humans, like forget product and the career ladder and the leadership, what is unique to us that we can bring that all these tools can't do or all these intelligent tools can't do. And I feel like it still is a deep understanding of human problems and human behavior, right? Your ability to actually figure out some of these things in this society to go after and the deeper understanding you have. I think that is what is going to separate out, because the cost of building, I mean, if you look at the cost of building anything has been going down even before the AI stuff. Right? It's so much easier to build an app and deploy. We've been seeing that transition, and it's going to probably come to zero because you can just, whatever you can dream of, you can build. So who's got that imagination and empathy? I think that's really the skill you need.
Got it. Yeah. And that is kind of like the evergreen skill, right? That I think people should have for life. And
it's also the toughest to master because it sounds so easy in theory. It's like, I personally also have used this word so many times. You got to have empathy, but if you just really deconstruct it and unpack it and like, what is it required? What does it really mean? It's not as straightforward as it seems.
Yeah. Like maybe talk a little bit more about that. Is it about like building the right listening skills, or why is empathy so hard?
Because increasingly we are shaped by our own world. I don't know if we want to get philosophical on this podcast, but you look at the macro and you look at what are the top problems in the world. Okay. Number one problem, this is what WHO talks about, is access to drinking water. Right? 3.5 billion people don't have access to drinking water. loneliness is one of the biggest epidemics. And so you look at these problems that are so widespread, but you look at what people like us in some ways in technology are solving and focusing on. I find that to be there's a huge gap. And you don't have empathy because you don't live in those shoes, right? You've not lived in those shoes of a lot of the people. And we kind of solve our own problems.
Yes.
Which, our shipping of groceries should go from 60 minutes to 15 to 5 to maybe it's automated and I never have to think about. And there's a huge gap between that and what the rest of the world might see. So, I do think there's a little bit of blurring of the boundaries that we have to go through and to live in the shoes of people and the problems to build that empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think everyone here is like solving first world problems, not like what most of the world faces.
And a lot of times we are all solving our company problems.
Yes. And so let's kind of switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about within a company, how do you build that credibility? How do you build that trust? And kind of, I guess, like a personal brand to a certain extent. And I think you have this really good post about the career trust ladder, about how like growing your career is basically about gaining trust. So what are the steps of this ladder?
Yeah. If I were to split like career roughly into like 3 buckets, right? Your early stage, middle stage, and late stage. The way to build trust in the early stage is really about striving for excellence, being excellent, right? You're doing foundational things really well. You follow through. If there's an action item, you get it done. If you say you're going to deliver something on Friday, you actually do it on a Friday. Small things. You're early in your career. Your ability to just be excellent, strive for excellence. You're putting a product spec together. You're not winging it. You're thinking deep. You're getting the customer data. I think the more you do that in that stage helps you build the trust. That's been my observation. I mean, it's dependability, right? If you have a new grad in your team, you're really trying to assess if you can depend on them or not. Not that they solve all your problems, but they get stuff done when they say. I think the middle stage, what I found, the more egoless you are, the better you build trust. And what I mean by that is, if you are the kind of person who puts, user, company before yourself, right? You take a company point of view. If you're the kind of person who says, hey, I actually don't need that many people for this project. I can do it with less. I think we are working on the wrong initiative. We need to change it because this is not additive. Or I'm willing to do this for the other team. You're wearing that hat, the what's right for the company, what's right for the user, as opposed to being about yourself or your team or your project. That's what builds trust, because people look to you as, someone who can partner well with others, someone who always tries to strive to do the right thing. I think that's the best way to build trust. And I think in your late stage, as you get into leadership, look, it really comes down to what you stand for. I think, people follow leaders who stand for something in the world, their view of the world, what problems they want to solve, the values they have, and how they demonstrate them, how they model them every day. If your actions and your words, there's a mismatch, you don't have trust. If what you say you value, but your decisions don't reflect that, you can have a trust deficit. So really leadership is about, what you stand for, your values and the culture you set. So I know those kind of like just simply breaking it down into 3 stages, right? Foundational to excellent work. As you get into mid-management, how much you try to do the right things without putting self above, and really what you stand for.
I really like maybe because I'm in the middle stage, but I really like your point about being selfless a little bit, like not thinking about yourself, thinking about the company and the user, because that's not the natural thing to do. I think for people who just like are over fixated on their career, like they're thinking about like, okay, how do I get to the next, like, checking the boxes for next level, or how do I get more scope or more headcount, right? That's kind of what they're thinking about.
It is, right? Like, it's my project. How big is my team, my impact? And it's not like people don't mean well, right? You should have ambition and you want to push. But if you really think about what will help you stand out, because if everybody's doing that, who's the person who actually takes a broader view and tries to do the right thing, even though it might not be in the short term very beneficial to you. That's the best way to gain trust. I mean, how many people would say, hey, the product we are working on, we should stop doing it because, it's very rare to see. And the more folks do that, they build that trust and credibility that they're always trying to do the right thing.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about that. Yeah. So that is like actually one of the most challenging situations, right? Like you have a whole team around this product and you actually think like, hey, actually we should stop investing in this and like sunset the product. And then who knows if you sunset the product, like, do you still have a job or not? Who knows? But like, have you had some experience doing this? Like you had to sunset a product without giving the impression that you kind of screwed up or in some way?
I've worked on products that others thought should be sunset. This was in the middle stage of my career. And later on, I have had to do that. It depends on the context of the company. I feel like it all comes down to opportunity cost. It's really kind of what traction does your product have? And to our previous conversation, how big can it be? And how do you compare it to the other opportunities your company has? That really is the criteria I feel a lot of times you use to make these calls, right? Over and over again. It's not that your product is a failure. I think, because those decisions are actually very simple, right? This product has got zero traction in the market. It's not going anywhere. I think those are obvious ones that are actually not super contentious in my mind, right? Because people kind of know, hey, this is not working out. Let's try something else. I think the tougher ones they're kind of doing okay. They are growing. But then, you kind of look at how big this can be. And at this rate, what else do we trade off in terms of resources, in terms of kind of our attention? And those are the tougher ones to make. And so again, you take a broader view and you look at what else could we be doing, investing in.
Yeah.
And you have to make those calls.
And when you're evaluating a PM that has who's in this situation, generally speaking, do you think someone who proactively talks about this stuff shows more maturity, or how do you evaluate PMs who have a product that basically failed, or decided to cancel their own product?
It depends on what kind of career stage a PM is. I don't expect PMs to always have the judgment to make these calls. But I think what you value in these situations is people who have utmost honesty and objectivity, right? Who kind of are not trying to hide the truth, hide the dark spots, embellishing stuff just so that, you continue to do that. I think that harms your credibility. Now, you can be emotionally attached to a product that's in question, but I think your ability to objectively say, hey, let's truly analyze what's the best case here versus what we could be doing. I think that objectivity, whether it's through data or reasoning, that's valuable, right? That's valuable more so than trying to sell or BS your way out of things.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty rare too, right? Because like a lot of product leaders, they constantly want to pitch their product. It's I'm going to present the most rosy picture, everything's going well, in these end of quarters. Yeah, there are
cultures like that too, where you kind of selling to each other, and the truth kind of is in the hallways, not in the meetings. Right. And, you have a problem when there's a large review and a meeting and everybody presents all this stuff and people come out and they get a coffee and they're like, I don't think that's ever going to work. If you have that disconnect in a company, right, that's a culture problem.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself always in a sell mode and pitching and not speaking the hard truth, there's a larger problem, not just the product you're working on, but culturally you got to fix that.
Yeah. So let's go back to building trust. So we talk about one way to build trust is to kind of try to speak the truth, no bullshit, be honest about the pros and cons, right? And then what are some other ways? Obviously, if you have credibility, you have a track record, that probably builds trust too. But what are some other ways to build trust?
Okay, building trust. I mean, look, obviously credibility is a big part of it. It's your tenure, it's your track record, it's what you've done in the past. That feeds into that. I would say how you show up matters a lot too in building trust. Whether you're open to ideas, whether you can take a contrary point of view into account, be flexible enough, that helps build trust with people who work with you. If you are blocking those things out, you're going to get less of the truth and less of that trust from other people to come up with problems for you, right? So I do think it's not just your credibility, it's how you show up. And the
Yeah.
last thing I feel like building trust is your ability to speak the truth. And as simple as it sounds, I know for sure, talking to a lot of folks, it's not always the culture. You know, the bad news doesn't always travel fast. Hey, this didn't work for X. And there's a tendency to defend, to hide, to kind of not tackle those issues. And the more you are able to do it, I think you build a lot of credibility and trust in the organization.
Yeah, but I think, okay, let's talk about another challenging situation, right? So like you have a whole management chain and the person at the top might not recognize, all the stuff that's happening on the ground. So maybe you want to speak the truth to that person, but like, you have a manager and you have a manager's manager who might want to present like a more rosy picture or something. like how do you deal with like all these different levels? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, look, those situations are tricky. I would start with giving folks in your management chain the benefit of doubt. Don't assume that, they're not open to having that discussion, right? I would share with those people.
Yeah.
And if you find like you're still not making headway, right, your concerns are still not being addressed, then I think you should go to who you think will be receptive and can address it. Ed Catmull, right, who was the CEO of Pixar, had this really interesting principle, which I kind of really like. And he talked about your communication hierarchy should not mirror your org hierarchy. That information should be, free and fluid, and you should be able to connect, not always going through like a chain of command. Now, I know it's easier said than done, but a healthy culture, you're able to do that, right? Mm-hmm. You're able to talk about issues in the right forums without getting approval from like a bunch of like manager folks. So, if you are in that situation, I know, Peter, you're not, but in general, if somebody is, I would not hesitate trying and going through the channels, but like still pushing for, getting the real data out.
Yeah. There might be like also like a timing thing too. Like, like if you build some credibility yourself, then maybe it's like the org is more open to hearing you out when you try to speak the truth about other things.
Yeah. And also helps always to use, come up with like, what would you do differently? What's the mitigation? If you're going to highlight something's not working well, you also want to suggest what could we be doing instead, or how could we be doing it better?
Yes.
Because if you don't have the latter, then you're just like a complainer, and like that harms your credibility too. If you're the guy who's only saying this is broken, without actually contributing to fixing it, right? That doesn't build credibility either. So I would like couple the two. But I think what definitely harms your credibility is when you know something is broken and you like sugarcoat it and you massage it and you try to market your way out of it, right? That definitely will harm both the product and your standing.
Yeah, I love that. I think I got a similar advice before. Like if you have a problem, you should try to offer some sort of solution. If you have like 3 different options, you should try to at least make a recommendation on which option you think is best. Like even if it's like not fully baked, you try to just like make, so you can say it's not fully baked, but you can try to make a recommendation.
And if you're trying to really escalate up in your organization, it's always better to also that you've tried one of those solutions. Like, you want to come across as you've done everything in your capacity and now you're asking for help, as opposed to, look, I'm just going to come and complain to you because you're the senior most person.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Microsoft. I think you've had a great experience there so far. It sounds so, like before, Microsoft was pretty famous for like a lot of internal strife and competition, right? And like teams competing against each other. And I think the culture has really changed since then. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, because I think you've been there for a couple of years now. Maybe you've seen this culture actually change. Like how has it happened?
Yeah. I know we spoke about this a bit in the past, but look, if I were to just simply state it, there's no hubris anymore. There's no like entitlement to success, which maybe I found when the first time I was here. I'll give you an example. Very recently we had this internal kind of a offsite conference for some of the senior most leaders on product and design. And these were a group of folks who work on some of the biggest products, I would say, not just Microsoft, but any software product. There were folks from Windows and Copilot and M365 and Teams, Outlook, you name it. And we had a couple of days of sessions, and everybody was coming and presenting on various topics. And pretty much everyone was talking about how they can do certain things better. Okay, here's what we're struggling with, X. This is what we need to do. Here's where we got it wrong. This is what we need to do. And, I was thinking about that, and it was so refreshing because this was not very typical at Microsoft or at most companies. There was no sell. People weren't coming up and saying, look how good their team and their impact has been. If you were listening in that room, you wouldn't know what products these folks are talking about, right? Because it almost felt like everybody's an upstart, everybody's behind. And I think that is the thing that has changed in my mind, where there's a lot of honesty. There's, obviously you've heard of the term growth mindset. And I used to think before I joined, is this like a marketing thing? Is this real? But I definitely see it's permeated through, and people genuinely are striving to do better, no matter how successful, how big the product is. That's what's changed.
And what role has Microsoft CEO played in this? Like, is it kind of?
I mean, there's no question. It comes from him, right? The change. If you think about, he's like the nucleus, the epicenter, right? And that's the seismic shift. And I think, his leadership team and, that's kind of just permeated through. But definitely he was the catalyst, because that was the only delta between the previous one and this company.
So if you were to summarize some of, Satya's superpowers, like, is it like listening very well? Is it like being authentic, being
empathetic, and also being decisive? I mean, he's done some bold moves. That's right. You look at the acquisition of LinkedIn, acquisition of GitHub, all of the partnerships we've done. Yes, there's the empathetic side of him, but he's also very decisive and very bold in some of these things. And, it's a combination of all those things that makes him super effective.
I really wish, I think as humans, we're all wired to actually hear about the struggle and the vulnerabilities. Like, that to me is much more interesting than like you posting about your accomplishments. So, so I actually hope that like both in like job interviews and like, we're trying to tell a story during all hands, like the leader who's actually authentic and honest about like this stuff, like I have a lot more respect for.
Yeah. Totally.
So let's talk a little bit more about your elite product leadership course. Like, what are some of the main topics that you cover in the course?
Yeah, I recently, I did a couple of cohorts. It's been fun. It's an experiment. Yeah. And I started this course because, at least through my journey, a lot of times I felt like, in hindsight, this was so obvious. Why didn't anybody tell me this? Because nobody teaches you the leadership, so to speak, right? You kind of evolve and you grow and learn on the job. And as you go through this stuff, you can sometimes, you're like, some insight would have helped me handle this situation better, handle this context better. Yeah. And so I felt that a lot. I was like, I wish I knew this 1 year ago. I wouldn't have done that in this way. And so I started this course. So I was like, so that I can actually share those insights, and hopefully some of them are useful for people as they are going through that leadership journey, right? So that's the genesis of the course. By the way, I donate all the money I make off this course. So it is not for monetary reasons. I generally feel like it's my way of giving back. I cover 3 things in the course. One is really about communication skills. And I know it's like a often repeated topic, but really, how do you communicate to inspire, to align everybody, to actually rally people into action? That's like, communication is your number one job as a leader. So I spend a lot of time on that. I have a bunch of case studies, bunch of techniques that I talk through. The second is on decision making. How do you think about decisions? Which are the decisions you should make quickly versus wait as late as possible? How do you make decisions? And there's a lot of case studies, and that, I then give those simulation to students, and I tell them actually what the decision was. So it's kind of fantastic to compare notes. And then the third thing I work through is really, how do you build teams and great cultures? And, it's everything from recruiting to rituals you can follow, things that I've seen work for others. How do you build healthy cultures? How do you seek truth always? So that, there's this notion of power distance. The higher you go up as a leader, the more curated you get the information, right? And how do you not fall into that trap? So there's a lot of these kind of over my journey, what I've learned from some great leaders, what I've learned by making mistakes, I've tried to capture that into insight. So that's the course. It's been fun.
Yeah, some of the stuff you could have spent you could have wasted years on, right? Like if you realize this like a couple of years earlier,
Yeah. And that's the goal. It's like it doesn't prevent people from making mistakes, but at least you're not making the obvious ones. You're making them new so that you have new learnings.
Let me ask you, let me push a little bit. Like, what is something that you wish you realized earlier that probably would have saved like a couple of years of time, or just made your life easier?
There's many things like that.
Yeah.
Let me give you a couple of examples. Early management, I would spend a lot more time trying to get the average performers on my team to be great or low performers to be average. I thought that was kind of my responsibility, right? Over the years, you realize the best ROI you can get is spending most amount of time with your top performers, making sure they are happy, they are challenged. That's the best way to do it. One of the other mistakes I made was, trying to assume all the PMs have to be good at all the kind of core competencies. Hey, you have to be good at strategy and execution and design. And then I realized, what if I thought of my team as a sports team? If you look at a sports coach, right, pretty obvious, you play a position. And if you're a good athlete in that position, you're a wide receiver. The coach doesn't teach you how to be a quarterback, right? They look at your potential in one thing and they match you with that. And the more we think about our teams like that, which is, Peter is really good at X, and that's the kind of thing opportunity I'm going to match with. There are two outcomes with that. One, Peter as a PM is happier because they're playing to their strengths. And second, you get much better impact because now I'm not trying to put Peter onto a project which he's not really good at. And so how do you craft, sounds obvious now to me, but I didn't have that insight earlier. So I thought everybody has to grade at everything and I have to spend X amount of time. And there's many things like that I've learned over the years. And so I just share those so that hopefully people approach their things a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah, that's the problem I always had with this is career ladder things where there's 5 boxes and you gotta make sure you check all 5.
Yeah.
Because people are usually do very well on one or two things. I mean, you can't be terrible at otherwise, but usually they spike on one or two things, right?
If you notice or detect a superpower that a certain person has, and everybody has some special skill, maybe not super early in their career, but as they evolve. And if you really capitalize on that and give them the right opportunities, it's such a great team. Obviously, you have to make sure you have a diverse team, that not all of them spike on one thing versus the other. But I think, so that kind of mindset actually really helps you craft a right mix on a team.
Yeah. I love that. It's like a good person to work for. So So where can people find you, Amit? And also your course, your teaching our cohort.
My course is on Maven. You can search for that. You can find me on LinkedIn. I usually on and off share my insights there. I'm active there. Yeah. My inbox is open. Send me a note if you have questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for making time. I think this is an awesome discussion and I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure you have a lot more to offer in your LinkedIn post and also your course. So
hey, thanks, so Peter, for having me, and good work with your podcast. I've been enjoying some of the guests you've brought recently. So keep up the good work.
Yeah, it's my way from learning from people like yourself. Yeah, cool. Thank you.